Hi, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and I appreciate all of you joining me today for episode 695 with our guest, Dr. Corey Hopkins. Listeners, if you like this episode and you want to check out more stories from amazing people doing great science today, you can find more episodes of our show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you like to listen. And today, Corey has some excellent stories to share. So I hope you're ready to meet another one of our brilliant people behind the science after a short message from this episode's sponsor.
For 45 years, Lampire Biological Laboratories has been a key player in the life science industry.
We are currently looking to add new talent to our rapidly growing team.
For more information, email hr@lampire.com.
Come change the world with us.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. Today, I am thrilled to be speaking with our guest scientist, Dr. Corey Hopkins. So, Corey, welcome to our show today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we are so excited to get to know more about you and the wonderful work that you do. But before we get into all of those details, let me first start by telling our listeners a little bit about you and how you got to where you are today. So listeners, Corey is a professor in the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. He earned his bachelor's degree in chemistry from Indiana University and his Ph.D. in chemistry from the University of Pittsburgh. Afterwards, Corey held industry positions at Aventis Pharmaceuticals, Procter Gamble Pharmaceuticals, and then Sanofi-Aventis Pharmaceuticals. He served on the faculty at Vanderbilt University before joining the faculty at the University of Nebraska Medical Center in 2016. Now, Corey has been awarded UNMC's Excellence in Mentoring Award, the Most Promising Invention Award, and Distinguished Scientist Award. And today, Corey, we're excited to get to know you, of course, both as a scientist and as a person. So can you start by telling us what you like to do when you're not doing science?
I have a couple of hobbies. Science takes up a lot of the time around my professional life. Some of the things I do like to do, though, is I've been an active home brewer, and I guess that probably ties into the science part, for a number of years. And then outside of that, I'm an avid golfer, a poor golfer, but an avid golfer. And this year I decided to try something different and thought I could learn guitar. So that's going very slowly, enjoyably. But my daughter, who's taking guitar in high school, has laughed me many, many times already. But I try to do something outside of work that keeps me busy.
Oh, absolutely. I think the learning curve steepens a little as you age. So that's fair.
That's correct.
So are you playing classical guitar? Is it rock? What do you like to play?
More rock alternative. I like music. I've always enjoyed music, but I'm finding it's very challenging.
Well, it's never too late to pick up something new. And I'd love to hear that you've got these different hobbies, whether it's homebrewing, golf, guitar, things to keep you busy that help you take a break from the science, because I know it can sometimes be all consuming. But I'd love to talk about your scientific side as well. So, Corey, how do you describe your research to people who aren't in your field or maybe aren't in science at all?
Ultimately, what my lab and what we've been trying to do is we try to answer the biological questions behind disease. And we do that via chemistry. If there's a disease state, we try to make chemical compounds, drug-like compounds, and then we can test those in biological systems to either confirm or refute that a particular protein is involved in this process. And we really go after diseases that have an unmet medical need. We're not really interested in finding yet another, say, Lipitor. So we've concentrated most of my career on neuroscience, because I think that is one of the largest areas of unknown diseases. We have schizophrenia, we have depression, we have Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. None of those really are treated effectively. So trying to really understand that, and as science evolves and we have computational methods coming into play, that's going to hopefully aid us. But the large overarching part of my science is trying to understand diseases and how we might be able to treat those.
phenomenal. Well, Corey, I look forward to getting into some of the details as we go through our conversation today. But I'd love to talk a little bit about motivation and inspiration. I know sometimes it can be hard to come by as a scientist, but do you have a favorite quote or a saying or just something that really motivates you?
I have a couple, and one of that is really tied to science, and one is sort of change is inevitable, growth is optional. And science is always changing. What we do, what I do, my graduate students do, we make a lot of things that don't work. So when you do that, you kind of have to learn from that and grow from that. And then the other one is, as a PI with graduate students and stuff, is a good friend of mine told me this, and I'm not sure where it came from, but it's sort of the manager administers and the leader innovates. And that's sort of how I try and lead our group. And some of the work we do, we love to have really good publications, but we also look at making new molecules that might become drugs, and we have to patent that and be innovative in our design. So I try and lead on those two things, is, understand how something's going to change, science is changing, and we may make something and that leads into a different direction, but always trying to not micromanage, not just simply looking at what everyone's doing, but trying to provide that innovative leadership. So it's kind of the two things that I've been running my group with over the last several years.
That's phenomenal. And I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes you do have to kind of take that step back to be able to get that perspective, to be able to do that innovative thinking and remove yourself from the minutia of micromanaging everything.
Yeah, I mean, you hire good people and you let those people work, and you try and provide some of that leadership, and mistakes happen and things don't always go the way you plan it. So you just have to really keep moving on.
Absolutely. And I think the people that we learn from along the way can help shape how we lead and how we work in our everyday lives. So when you look back on your own career and your own experiences in science, Corey, are there particular people who really rise to the top of your mind as mentors or role models or people who you looked up to?
There are a couple. My Ph.D. advisor was obviously very instrumental in my career, getting me to where I am. And he was a hard-nosed advisor doing organic synthesis and really taught me not necessarily the value of hard work, but hard work in results. And then when I moved into industry, I had a sort of unofficial mentor, but he and I had offices together, and he'd been in industry for a long time. And he was phenomenal. We hit it off right away. And it was really one of these, the mentor when you find him. And he really took me under his wing, showed me the ropes of drug discovery, what to do, what questions to ask. And then just in a personal level, I mean, we would sit and talk baseball for a long time. And then that would lead into the next discussion of chemistry. And he recently just passed away. And that was really one that stood out. And we kept in touch even after I left industry and went to academia. And he was a huge supporter of that as well. So, just kind of seeing how he interacted with me is sort of how I interact with the junior scientists as well, is let them work, let them figure things out, but be there when they need that extra push or extra help.
Definitely. And I think having these mentors can really shape and change your career trajectory. And you particularly have had a really interesting career path. You mentioned spanning both industry and academia. I'd love to talk about that a bit if we can. So maybe we'll start at the beginning, Corey. What first sparked your interest in science? Or do you remember when you first started getting interested or fascinated by it?
As a very young kid, didn't have a chemistry kit, didn't do all that. But when I was in high school, I was taking chemistry and physics at the same time, I think probably junior year. And I loved both of them. And it was sort of my physics teacher. I'm like, man, physics would be kind of cool. Maybe major in that. And he's like, yeah, I don't know about that. And just because of job opportunities and such. And he's like, if you really love chemistry, that might be the way to go as well. So that was really the first spark I had. And from that chemistry class, I knew immediately I was going to major in chemistry as an undergraduate. So majoring in chemistry, then it became organic chemistry was really the passion. I've had a couple stints in industry. In fact, after my undergrad, I worked through college. I didn't do any external research. I was having to wait tables to help pay my way through college. So for me, the natural thing was to find a job. So I worked in between my undergraduate and graduate. And there I had a couple mentors as well that said, you might want to think about grad school, and it actually helped me find the grad school that I ended up going to. So from undergraduate, loved chemistry, worked in the chemical industry, and then moving on to graduate school. And there again, coming from my background, it was not even anywhere in my periphery that I should be going into an academic lab. It was work and get a job. And working in industry, and this was the late 2000s, 2008, 2009, when the industry was taking a little bit of a beating, is when I decided maybe I don't want to stay here and took a flyer on moving over to academia. So it's been a back and forth type of journey. And luckily, my wife came along and at every time was like, let's do it. And that has obviously helped a lot. And now that I'm in academia now for 14 years, I can't imagine going back. It's exactly what I do, the science I want. I get to mentor the next generation of scientists. I get to teach those scientists. I teach in our PharmD program, so I get to see the professional students as well. So the days are never boring, and you always have something, whether it be direct research or teaching, that really keeps you going.
Definitely. And I think this can be a difficult decision out there for students who may not really have experienced either industry or really academic research themselves. So what advice would you give students who are waffling on the decision of whether they want to go into industry or whether they want to stay on this academic path?
I think that social media plays into this a little bit, that there's this myth that if all of us PIs want all of our students to go into academia, that's really not true. So I think it's really good to talk to your advisor. I think it's good to talk to some people in industry. I mean, we have industry speakers come in all the time to talk to our students so that they can have a perspective of both. But the science is not that different. And I think that's the one thing people probably don't understand. In industry, everyone's kind of rowing the boat in the same way. Whereas here at a university, I'm kind of on my own a little bit, but you still have the same interactions with your colleagues. You still get to bounce ideas off their opinions and stuff. So it's not that much different than people play it out to be. I think it is a real opportunity for students now, especially social media. Twitter has a lot of really great industry people that are willing to answer questions. So I would really encourage students to reach out to those individuals.
Fantastic. And I think you're a great example yourself, Corey, that if you quote unquote commit to one of those paths, you're not stuck on it. You can transfer between the two.
Absolutely. And it's definitely more common than it has ever been. And going both ways. I know people who start off as assistant professors and just wasn't for them, that went to industry, and vice versa. So I think those opportunities are there, and it's just a matter of willing to reach out and discuss those possibilities with individuals that maybe you don't know that well, but are willing to network and help those, whether it be a junior scientist or even someone a little bit further along.
Absolutely. So what would you say, I guess, looking back, what are some of these key moments that really helped you get to where you are today there at the University of Nebraska Medical Center?
I think the key, it was moving from industry to Vanderbilt. And that move was at the absolute right time and in the right situation, because we moved and I was not on the tenure track. So I didn't have that timeline of having to get grants and having to get teaching and everything. I could kind of play it a little bit slower. So we went in, we had some big, large grants already, and I kind of ran one of our Parkinson's projects. And it allowed me to see how universities work, because that's the one thing that is a lot different, is just how the administration works, much different than industry. So that was really the key, I think, time frame for me, is when I did move to be in that position. And then from there, I was able to develop a lot of collaborators that I still have today, and understand projects that may not have been on my radar at the time, because some of the academics are really looking at very unique diseases. So that was probably the key to my transition. And then the transition here was, again, wanting another step, wanting to have that larger teaching role, wanting to have that really independent research group. So those are probably the two things that shaped my move to academia and made it fairly smooth.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate you walking us through some of these key moments in your own career path and sharing some of your perspectives. And I know you are working on so many cool things right now, Corey, but is there one particular project that you're perhaps the most excited about that you want to share in more detail with us today?
Yeah, hopefully my students won't listen to this and they won't know which project I'm the most excited about. But as science evolves and new modalities come in, we, as chemists and drug discovery scientists, are looking at this new PROTAC approach of developing drugs. And what this does is basically, before you think of a drug as a key and the receptor is a lock, and you turn this lock and it either turns it on or turns it off. And this new modality is a way of actually degrading an entire protein, just it latches on and it just gets rid of the protein. So that's a way of now going after disease. And we've just started this project maybe 6 months ago, and we've already gotten some really exciting results in this disease state that we're studying it for right now is colorectal cancer, which does not have a great outcome. So that was one of the nice things about that is my student really took that and started to be the driver of that project too. So now really interacting with students on the level of a colleague, which is really fun to have. And we try and have that in our group is that once you're in the group, we're all colleagues, right? Let's treat each other as that and everyone's ideas. So it's really good to see a student, junior scientist really take that on. So that's one project that's really exciting. And I'll throw a second one in there. We've been working in neurodegeneration and Parkinson's for a number of years, starting with proteins that we think might be disease modifying, so really slow down the neurodegeneration. But we're also looking at Parkinson's disease. You have a drug called L-DOPA. That's usually what most patients are on. But it leads to some side effects that impact quality of life. And there are these involuntary movements. They're called dyskinesias. So we've been working on finding a treatment for that for a number of years. And we've now shown in an animal model that we can reverse those dyskinesias. And that project's really going great. And again, another student is really spearheading that work. And we've now published on that the last couple of years. So we're really excited about that as well. So sort of the two, cancer and neuroscience, are the hallmarks of our group right now. And those two projects are two that keep you going every day when you come in and might have not a fun day in the lab or teaching or something. It's always nice to come in and see new data on those projects.
Absolutely. I think having a couple different irons in the fire can be helpful because if something's going poorly on one project, odds are something's going to be going better on one of these other projects.
Yeah, and I try and have the students work on multiple projects too, so you don't just get the all highs or all lows on one project. And for chemists, we can work on a lot of different projects. It doesn't really matter if it's pain or if it's cancer. Most of the techniques are the same. In the lab, synthesize a new drug, and we can test that. So what the students learn in the different disease states is really the biology and how to attack the biology, whereas the chemistry is somewhat universal. So they each have projects in different disease areas. That way they can understand the different diseases and make them a little bit more well-rounded as a scientist.
Very interesting. Well, I think that is a phenomenal approach. And you talked about some of the exciting moments that you've had lately, but I think there can be a lot of struggles, a lot of failures, a lot of down moments in science. And I think these just aren't talked about enough because I think everybody goes through them. And oftentimes you feel very alone when you're doing so. So Corey, do you have one of these big challenges or failures that you experienced that you can tell us about?
We do medicinal chemistry. And as a medicinal chemist, I just tell the students, you're going to fail 90% of the time. You're going to make a new drug molecule and it just isn't going to work. It either doesn't work against the protein that you want, turning it on, turning it off, or the chemistry doesn't work and it becomes very problematic. And the Parkinson's project's one that, like I said, we've been working on for a while. As an academic, one of the biggest failures is always funding. And we had funding through the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and they were a phenomenal organization to work with. And that sort of ended. And we were really flailing for a couple of years to try and find a home for this to fund, trying to kind of limp it along and keep it going. And it got to a point where I was about to give up and reconnected with a colleague. She's actually in Sweden. She's a world expert in this field. So we kind of went together and were able to get more funding for this. So it's challenging. You have scientific failures. You can have sort of administrative failures as far as funding goes. Science failures, I can handle a little bit more because it just is always going to be different. But some of the other failures are where it can be challenging. These projects that you absolutely love when someone else doesn't love them either. It become a dark days at times. But as far as science goes, you're making a compound, you have this great idea. We have these great computational tools to visualize, and then it doesn't work. And you go right back to the drawing board. And those days are not fun. But when you do get those positive data, that can last for quite a while. So that's always something to take. Even the small successes, celebrate them.
Absolutely. And that is a perfect segue. I love celebrating these small successes as well as the big wins, because I think you're absolutely right. You sort of need these small wins to bolster you in these deserts between the big successes. So Corey, do you have a favorite success story you'd like to share, whether it is one of these big wins or even just these small but particularly meaningful or sustaining successes?
I talked about this project as one of the exciting ones, but this project for colorectal cancer, we had made some compounds and a student was doing her comprehensive exam, which is sort of the step between being a graduate student and now being a PhD candidate. And they have to do their own independent proposal. And she proposed some of these PROTAC compounds and we started working on them. And we got some data just a few weeks ago. And these things are phenomenally active. They work really potently to degrade this protein. So now we're really excited about putting this into an animal model of cancer. And that was one I just didn't know if it was going to work. We kind of thought it might, and I don't want to say jump on what's hot, but we'd seen the success of this type of modality and thought it would work on ours. And it did. And it helped the student. Their mood shifted drastically. My mood shifted drastically when you see that success. That was probably the one piece of data we've got in the past month that was kind of the aha moment that, okay, I think this can work now, and really spurs even more ideas and more excitement to the project.
That is phenomenal. Well, congratulations to you and this student or PhD candidate. I think this is a huge win. And I'm curious, how do you celebrate these maybe intermediate successes, these moments when you get the promising data or things are looking up?
I'm still trying to figure out how to effectively do that, I think. We talk about it and we congratulate each other, but that's the one thing that I need to try and figure out how to, I don't even formally do that. I know, like when my students get their first publication, I celebrate that. I get a coffee mug with the picture of the paper on the coffee mug, and that's sort of their initiation to the group. But these little successes, I think it's a kind of an internal pat on the back and try and move forward. So it's something we're working on, I guess.
I love it. You need like a little mini success board you can put on the fridge or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that is wonderful. And I'm glad to hear that you're having these exciting successes. I think they can make all the difference for students to give them the confidence to keep moving on in their career. And we talked about some of the wonderful things you like to do with your time when you're not very busy doing science and working with your students. But I'd love to talk about books as well. I'm always encouraging our listeners out there to read broadly and to read for fun and maybe to use reading as a way to step back from the science and broaden your perspective a little bit. So do you have a favorite book, Corey, that you'd like to recommend to us, whether it's related to science or not?
Actually, one of my goals this year was to read more as well. And read, I'll put in quotations because there's a lot of books on tape as well. But the one that, and I don't even remember how I came across this, but the book's called Unthinkable by Helen Thompson. And it basically is little stories about individuals that have, for lack of a better term, a unique brain. So there's one story about an individual who can remember every day of their life. So if you go back and say, okay, October 5th, 1995, they can remember everything they did that day, is from the clothes they wore to what they had for breakfast. And interviewing that person, what was really fascinating was the story when they realized that they had this uniqueness, kind of talking to their friends when they were younger. And it's like, oh, you remember when we were like 4 years old or 5 years old and we did this? And they're like, what? I don't remember that. So that person remembers that. And the other story was really interesting is there are people who are perpetually lost, even in their own house. So if they wake up, walk down the hallway, it's new to them. So they have to have sort of Post-it notes of where things are. And I wish I should have remembered, there's a particular cell in the brain that kind of monitors that, and that they're sort of lacking in that. So just a couple of those types of stories in that book was just amazing to see. And working in neuroscience, I found it fascinating. But the author did just a great job of making it non-scientific, but yet still bringing in the science of it. So that was one that will stick with me for quite a while.
Oh, well, this is right up my alley. You've got my attention. I'm looking forward to picking up this book as well. Listeners, Unthinkable by Helen Thompson. I will add it to our website for you all to find there. So we appreciate this recommendation. And we've talked about some different aspects of your career, Corey. One of the things we haven't really touched on yet is travel. And I think as a scientist, you do get quite a few opportunities to travel, to go to conferences, to train in different institutions. So when you think about all of the places that you've been for science, do you have a particular one that really sticks out in your memory or that was your favorite?
You're right. I've been extremely lucky in my career to be able to go internationally and throughout the United States. And it's always nice to go visit the favorite cities. But this was probably about 8 years ago, and we traveled to Scotland. It was an international heterocyclic chemistry conference, I believe. And I was giving a talk and I was presiding over a symposium as well. But I think what made it is a trip that my wife was able to come with me. And just being able to take sort of a week and fly over. We spent 3 or 4 days in Edinburgh, and then the conference was in Glasgow. So we took the train over to Glasgow. And just being able to tool around in that country, we're able to take a tour around a couple of the locks, one of these bus tours, but really just immersing ourselves in both those cities. My wife's Scottish by birth, and I have some heritage there too. So that was the first international trips I had taken as well. So that was something different for me. So that was the one trip that I will always remember, is having 8 to 9 days in Scotland and having the science, which was a great conference, but really just being able to get away from that and just enjoy Scotland. And I think one of the Queen's nieces was getting married at that time. So Edinburgh was just full of people and full of life. So that was fun. And then Glasgow reminded me a lot more of my time in Pittsburgh, sort of a very blue collar town, and being able to enjoy that as well. So that was the trip that we'll always remember. Sure, we probably could go to Scotland, but the science conference and stuff is what got us there the first time. So
I think it does absolutely force you to go to places where you might not necessarily plan a trip yourself to go there. And I'm curious, I know Scotland has quite a few lovely golf courses. Were you able to pick up some clubs while you were there?
I did not. I wanted to. The one day was Sunday that I had, and some of the golf courses are actually closed on Sundays over there. So I didn't, but it gives me a reason to go back though.
I was going to say, perfect excuse to return. So it sounds like you had an amazing time. And I think this is something that people don't necessarily associate with careers in science, these opportunities to travel, to see the world. And there are, I think, a lot of things people don't really realize about scientists and science careers, because there are these stereotypes. I think scientists are portrayed as being serious and critical and wearing their little white coats, working alone in a lab. But that's really not how it works in so many cases. So, Corey, do you have an example of a story that shows this human side of science, whether it's a quirky tradition you've experienced in a lab or just a funny or fond memory with colleagues that really highlights the side people don't often see?
I'm starting this new, probably quirky tradition in the group, and it is I get tattoos of my students' success. So when my students discover a new drug molecule, and once it is successful in an animal model. So on my arm right now, we have a compound that was reversed substance abuse disorder. So heroin and cocaine. We have another compound that reverses chronic kidney disease. And then another one that reverses pain, all in animal models. So once they show that, then I'll find a place on my arm to get that tattooed on. So students, they're like, really? You're going to do that? And I'm like, well, why not? So that's sort of one of the quirky things that we're starting now. That's celebrating a major success, not a little success, if I'm going to permanently put it on. The other is just remembering back to graduate school, some of the people I worked with and those late nights that you're there and developing the friendships, and now knowing these people that are professors or high up in pharmaceutical industry and being able to remember those times as well. So there are very few, and I get it a lot when we talk to people that science are boring and this and that. And I've never seen that in my experience, really. A lot more personable than what people think. So it's good to be able to show that to a wider audience as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I love this tattoo tradition. I'm curious, how did this start? What gave you this idea initially when that first compound was discovered?
So my wife and my daughters, we decided to get a family tattoo. My oldest daughter graduated high school and we were going on a family trip. So why don't we get a tattoo? And we said, okay. So we all got that. And then I got another one of the human brain and the compound dopamine, since we work on Parkinson's and drug abuse. So dopamine's obviously a major player. And I was thinking, I want to do something else. And then it just like, maybe I should just start getting compounds. Everyone that saw it liked it, at least told me they liked it. So it just kind of, not necessarily a whim, but it was kind of the next thing to do that meant something to me. It's both family and work, and it's something that we could keep going.
Oh, absolutely. And these compounds look pretty cool too. They're visually interesting. So
They are, so as I tell everyone that joins the lab, what you really want to be able to say is you've made something, synthesized something that no one has ever made before. And that's the key. We're not going to just make what someone else has made. We're not going to follow someone else. So I've had high school students work in the lab. We have a great program here in Omaha, and they've been able to publish with us and make compounds that no one's ever made before. They may be useless, but that's something unique that we as medicinal chemists get to do every day.
Well, I think that is so cool, Corey. And I know you're doing amazing work in the lab. And we hinted at this previously. Sometimes there are things that stand in the way between you and all of the things that you would like to do, whether that's funding or staff or technology or feasibility, time, the list goes on and on. So if we took away those barriers and gave you everything you could possibly dream of, what is the one question you would want to tackle first?
Working in neuroscience, there are just so many unanswered questions. And I think one of the first research problems I would really want to tackle is really understanding neurodegeneration better. There are some diseases, Parkinson's, we have a fairly good handle on the neurodegenerative part of it. Alzheimer's, I think we're still a long way from really understanding that. So if I could just bring in the best scientists into some made-up institute, that's probably what I would tackle. And you'd have to have a lot of different people, chemists, biologists, geneticists, people working on diagnosis, because early diagnosis is really going to be the key in these types of diseases. Parkinson's, by the time you start showing outward signs, you've lost about 80% of those neurons that cause that. So having early detection techniques. So I think really looking at that. And then you can even go further, like I alluded to with schizophrenia. It's still a challenging disease that we don't know that much about. So I'd really love to be able to tackle the human brain, which is the most complex entity in the world, in my opinion. Just trying to understand how these diseases come about, how to best diagnose them, how to best treat them would be my ultimate goal.
Well, I am 100% in on this plan, Corey. It sounds great. We appreciate you dreaming big with us today. And you've shared so much, these insights, these stories of yours. I'd love to end with advice. So for our listeners out there, do you have a particular piece of advice that really helped you that you want to pass on to them today?
Having a lot of different people that I've worked with, I've seen different managerial styles. And I think the best advice that I ever got is always remember that the people you interact with, the people that are either junior to you, they're not you. So what works for you is not going to work for them. And you really have to tailor interactions. You have to tailor your mentor and mentee relationship to individuals. And growing up, I never really thought of it like that. So what spurs me to work is not going to be the same for someone else. Success metrics are not going to be the same. So really being able to personalize, whether it be a peer-to-peer contact or sort of a manager to junior scientist relationship, is really what I strive to do. And hopefully that comes across to those that I work with. But I think that was probably the piece of advice that I still take with me, is just remember that everyone's not you. So we have to tailor everything we do to that design.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful advice, whether you're leading a group or just in everyday life, just kind of understanding that everyone's coming at an experience from a different background and perspective and way that they think about things.
That's what makes it so great, right? Is that my group is from all over the world, and really just understanding those differences and being able to listen to everyone and have everyone behind everyone, sort of lifting everyone up type of mentality. I think that really gets people to want to work and be excited about what they're doing too.
Absolutely. Well, that is a wonderful message for our listeners. Is there any other last message you'd like to end with today, or a last note of inspiration you'd like to give everyone out there?
Whatever you start out doing doesn't have to be the end of what you do. So always look for those opportunities. They may be quite different than what you think they are. So, if you're at a scientific conference, maybe go to a talk that you wouldn't have decided to. Pick one out of the week. Say, I'm going to go do something completely different. Or maybe there's a industry or academic talk that you want to go see. And for junior scientists, don't be afraid to reach out to people. email, social media. I know most of my friends and colleagues have no problem with people asking questions, asking a little bit of advice. So take advantage of the technology that we have.
I think that is amazing advice, and I can attest to it myself. I do all these cold emails for podcast introductions, as we saw with Corey here. But in general, people are so friendly, so welcoming, and so excited to share their research, their interests, and their expertise. So wonderful message to share with our listeners. If they want to learn more about you, Corey, and the work that you're doing, what is the best way for them to do so?
I think the best way is I do have a lab website, and it's coryhopkinslab.weebly.com. From there, you can learn about the group. It has my contact information, has my email information. That's probably the best way to go. My lab is on Twitter as well. We're at Hopkins_lab. That's another one. That's going to have a little bit more than just my science. It has a lot of pictures of my dogs and other things as well. But either of those two ways are ways to learn more about the lab and what we do.
Perfect. Well, listeners, definitely get connected with Corey. Check out that lab website to learn more. And Corey, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for your time.
I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, it's been wonderful to learn from you today, Corey. Listeners, great to have you here with us as well. We hope to see you next time on another episode of People Behind the Science.